Okay, it is my great pleasure to introduce Emily Drabinski, the president of American Library Association. She is an associate professor at the Queens College Graduate School of Library and Information Studies. She edits Gender and Sexuality in Information Studies, a book series from Librarians Press within books. Her talk for today is entitled Libraries for the Win. Without further ado, please join me in welcoming Emily Drabinski.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sin, and thank you to everyone for joining me this morning. You'll be looking at my face. I don't have slides to share this morning, but I'm hopeful that my remarks will spark a discussion and conversation about the state of libraries in the United States so that we can all discuss that as a group. I believe in conversations and one-on-one conversations and in talking as much as we can with each other as a way of advancing our interests as librarians and library workers, and I'm delighted to spend this morning with you. I want to start by saying thank you to Dr. Soo-Yeon Sin from Catholic University of America for the invitation to join you here today. As I looked back at the keynote speakers for the first 15 years of the Bridging the Spectrum Symposium, I'm even more honored to be invited to share remarks at this year's event. The purpose of this day is to foster unexpected connections. And there is nothing I love more than the unexpected connection. The program today features a broad range of information professionals from public, academic, and school libraries, and from the LIS disciplines, addressing some of the most vital questions in the information field today. How can we collaborate across institution types to serve our patrons across the lifespan? What do radical changes in online communication protocols mean for information sharing? What did our many pivots during the pre-vaccine era of the COVID-19 pandemic teach us about delivering public library services today? Reading through the program for today's event offers a snapshot of the most urgent and compelling library and information studies issues of our times. Kudos and congratulations to the program team. We have speakers here today from my home institution, Dr. Vicki Terrell from Queens College, my department, from right here at Catholic University of America, and from as far away as Oklahoma and the University of the Punjab. It is so good to be together with all of you this morning. My term as ALA president has been marked by efforts to divide and separate us, to prevent the kinds of unexpected connections that lead to clarity of vision and solidarity of purpose. To see all of us gathered together this morning to showcase innovative practices, projects, and research is a reminder that we have more in common than we don't. And what I think we really have in common is an interest in and desire to solve problems for people, to solve problems for publics. The first 8 months of my term as ALA president, today marks 2/3 of the way through. I've got 4 more months to go, but who's counting? The first 8 months have focused on the fight for libraries and the right to read. And I'll be honest, these weren't issues I thought much about for most of my career. I've been an academic librarian with the exception of about 10 months in public libraries and a handful of months as an indexer. And as an academic librarian, I didn't spend a lot of time thinking about the books that children and young adults read beyond my own. Mine did the Warriors series, all the Rick Riordan books multiple times, Wimpy Kid, and I Survived. He's turned into a teenager, moving slowly through the book Into Thin Air and dreaming of climbing mountains. I also, as an academic, had a robust critique of calling it Banned Books Week and less of an appreciation for why we have one. But that has changed fast. As I talk to you this morning, we continue to be caught in an unprecedented wave of organized efforts to challenge, censor, and ban reading materials and programming that represent Black experience, the experiences of people of color, the experiences of Indigenous people, and LGBTQ+ people like me. The numbers are easy to find and remarkable to me, in part for their failure to capture their impact. ALA will sort of bring out the year of 2023, the banned books numbers later this spring, but the data we have from the first 8 months of 2023 saw 695 attempts to censor library materials and services involving nearly 2,000 individual titles. Those numbers are stark, they are growing, and what we saw this year was a shift in challenges that were mostly confined to the school library sector that have now leaped over into the public library world. We anticipate final numbers from last year shortly, but those numbers can't account for the librarians who haven't reported censorship attempts. The numbers don't count the books that were never purchased or never shelved, because who can afford to invite that fight into a library already overburdened with demands for service that we can't meet? Public libraries like it here, right here in New York City, that are closed on Sundays. Academic libraries that can no longer afford to subscribe to core research journals. School libraries that are shuttered for lack of staffing or turned into detention centers for lack of political vision and will. Libraries under attack. Most importantly, to me, library workers are under attack. And I know it is not an easy time to be a librarian. It is not easy to live and work as an out queer librarian at a time when that has been cast by some as among the most dangerous people that you could be in America. As one of those queer librarians, when I think about it, it upsets me and keeps me from moving forward, the cruelty of it all and the complete and total waste. So we're going to talk a little bit about that today, but it's not going to be what dominates the conversation. I believe it's important that we not allow those who would destroy us, those who do not see our value and do not see it worth protecting, to set the terms and the terrain of a conversation around the good work that we do together. But make no mistake, we have to win this fight. If you have not signed up to be a part of the American Library Association's Unite Against Book Bans campaign, I urge you to take a few minutes to do so. You're all librarians or library workers, so I'm sure you can find the website, but it's uniteagainstbookbans.org. Add your name to that campaign. You'll gain access to a wide range of tools to help organize against censorship in your communities, including talking points for media interviews, suggestions for writing letters to the editor. One of my favorites, a downloadable yard sign that you can put to proclaim your support for the right to read. You'll find numbers, statistics, and stories. Most importantly, you'll be a member of a growing number of advocates who can be mobilized rapidly to respond to intellectual freedom challenges on the ground, like we did in New Jersey just a couple weeks ago, where 400 community members came together, united through that platform, to support school librarian Martha Hickson in her fight to keep books on the shelves at North Hunterdon High School in Annandale, New Jersey. Every time we see censorship happening in our communities, we need numbers like that to show up. So please take a moment, if you haven't already, to join UABB, the Unite Against Book Bans campaign. But let's not lose sight of what libraries are, what we do, and why we are worth saving. For the first 2 decades of my career, I've been a librarian for about 23 years. For the first 2 decades, the narrative we had to counter was this one: libraries are irrelevant. They don't matter anymore. They're not important. Libraries have been replaced by Amazon, Google, the internet. Reading isn't necessary anymore. Our brains have been so shorted out by scrolling through MySpace, Friendster, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Snapchat, TikTok, X. Or, implausibly and surprising to me, the rise of LinkedIn as a social platform. The institutions built for reading, they're old news. We don't need them anymore. The thorny and astronomically expensive universe of scholarly information, we should just throw it out. Everything's on the internet. I have my cousin's friend's girlfriend's password from the University of Michigan's library anyway, so who cares about what academic libraries do? I learned at a meeting just yesterday at Queens College at the City University of New York that my own college library is down to just 2 tenure stream library faculty. Who needs us? Who needs the library? We're in a different moment now. We've turned from institutions that ostensibly nobody needs, irrelevant remnants of olden times, into some of the most dangerous places in America. We are under scrutiny in ways that we haven't been in a very long time. When was the last time a senator in a southern state knew there even was an American Library Association, or that it had a president with a name, much less use that president and her name as a bludgeon for gutting public support for libraries? We're in a different moment now. But for those of us who work in libraries, the swirling happening around us is different, but what we do every day isn't so much. Navigating change, rolling with punches, responding to crises, and facilitating reading and research, it's what we always do and what we have always done. And I'd like to talk a little bit today about what that work is and why it is worth preserving. Like some of you, I'm sure, I had my first job in a library as a college student. I had a work-study gig at the main library at Columbia University, the school that made it possible for me to get out of Boise, Idaho. Nothing wrong with Boise, Idaho, but I have to say, if it's 1992 and you're queer, you maybe want to explore other options. When I look at it's actually got quite a robust queer community, but at the time I couldn't see it, I couldn't find it. It didn't seem possible for me to grow up and live there and live a full life there. I thought there are two lesbians who run an antique store up on Overland Road, and those would be the only people in my dating pool. It's like, I got to get out of this state. And so I went to Columbia University on the Oppenheimer Scholarship for a student from Idaho. That was me. And I got into a city with ample public transportation. I didn't learn to drive until the pandemic. And so it was really, my focus was on schools that were in places that had a good subway. Although yesterday, I have to say, just as an aside, I spent 4 hours on public transportation due to signal problems on the F tube, problem with signal problems on the F going to work, and then the shuttering of the tube due to back into Manhattan because of, anyway, inside baseball in New York City Transit. But let me just say that public libraries are not the only public infrastructure that needs support and expansion in this time. Anyway, we can talk more about my transit woes in the Q&A if you're interested. But anyway, so I get out of Idaho, I find myself in New York City, and I get a job that doesn't exist anymore. I weeded the card catalog for discarded and lost books. Back in the olden times, each book that we had in our shelves was represented in the catalog drawer by a title card, an author card, and multiple subject tracing cards. I don't know how many people in the room remember that, but that's how things used to be. And so if a book was lost or discarded, you'd have to go through the card catalog to remove each of those cards and throw them away. So at the start of each shift, I'd stop by the vast technical services room in the Butler Library to pick up a list of discards from my supervisor, whose name was Olga. You never forget your first library supervisor. And then I'd head to the catalog room, listening to my CD disc man, to pull every tracing for every book. I didn't know anything about libraries back then, so I didn't have a full appreciation for the value or importance of my job. Metadata, as those of you who work in technical services know, it is the stuff of the collection. It is how the collection turns from just a random assortment of books to a collection that people can search and retrieve, from which people can search and retrieve materials. Metadata maps the library collection. It tells the user what we have and don't have. It collates like with like. It enables access to the vast store of knowledge that's held on the shelves of our institutions. Metadata matters, and it matters a lot. I spent huge swaths of my last 20 years in libraries thinking about metadata, writing about metadata, analyzing metadata. But at the time, to be honest, it felt like I worked as a trash picker, pulling out cards and throwing them away. No idea what was in those cards and how much it mattered. One summer, when I decided not to go back to Idaho and to stay in the city, I worked 40 hours a week reading the card catalog of the now defunct Columbia University Library School. At the end of that summer, after I'd spent hours and hours reading the catalog, the university library decided to burn the entire thing. It was my first, but certainly not last encounter with futility in our field. But when I think back to that time, what I remember best is how things smelled, how they felt. Catalog cards are made of paper, subject as all paper is to break down. I had a professor in library school who talked about the decay of paper as a kind of small fire, as oxygen interacts with chemicals in paper, producing acid hydrolysis that smells, well, like old books. I remember how the corners of old catalog cards would crumble as I thumbed through them, littering the drawers with little bits of paperboard. Those distinct lines of red writing on half cards, I don't know if people remember that must have sat in that catalog since Dewey invented his decimal system in 1876. A note about Dewey. At the same time that Dewey ordered the universe in 10 sets of 10, he founded his library company, set up to sell the cards, drawers, and cases necessary to implement his system. So he invents this intellectual system and then also a business that can profit on the use and embeddedness of those intellectual systems. The intellectual and material aspects of library work have always been tightly bound to one another. It's one of the things I like best about being a librarian, the materiality of it all. And I've taken that lesson that our ideas are always already material things with me through the rest of my career. I've only been in this game for a couple of decades, like I've got hopefully a lot of years to go, but I've already been through a lot of technological and theoretical shifts, and maybe so have you. And it's the material bits that stick with me. My first job out of library school, which I got by responding to an advertisement in the New York Times, which will always feel like who gets a job by responding to an ad in the Times? It was like an amazing opportunity. Amazing surprise and a gift. But I worked as an indexer, assigning metadata to area studies journals, public administration, political science, and a few other topics from a dumb terminal at the H.W. Wilson offices in the Bronx. It was an interesting job. We certainly had the internet was available then, but at that job, my job was simply to fill out a form, an indexing form for each article that I read. And the technology that was given to me to do that was a dumb terminal that had a sort of blinking orange DOS screen. Even back in 2004, that was what they used. The computer itself was a remnant from an earlier technological time. It wasn't catalog, drawers, and cards. It didn't have a smell really, but it was a tool for building the infrastructure of knowledge formation just the same. A thing built by library workers to enable access to information, the infrastructure of curiosity and of exploration. It was very different from a catalog drawer, but functioned in much the same way. And it was an interesting job in many ways, but one of the things I remember most about it is every morning at 10:15, a woman would wheel a coffee cart through the hallway and ring a bell. And then we'd get up out of our cubicles and away from our dumb terminals, and you'd give the person a quarter. The woman would give you a styrofoam cup of coffee, you drink it, chat with your colleagues, and then 15 minutes later, they'd ring the bell again, and we'd all go back to our cubicles and continue indexing on our dumb terminal. It was like really a narrowed vision of a career. And you either lasted in an indexing company like that 6 months or 60 years, and I was definitely a 6-month person. My second job after that was at Sarah Lawrence College, where I found myself weeding a very different kind of machine, the CD-ROM tower. Does anybody remember CD-ROM towers? For a brief moment, that was how information was held and collected in our library. And we used the technology only briefly. When I was in library school in 2001, CD-ROMs didn't come up, and they were almost gone by the time I got my first job in an actual library. But if information comes only on a shiny plastic disk, if that's how it's going to be distributed, then we as librarians will select, acquire, describe, circulate, and preserve those disks. We pivot to technologies as they emerge. We are some of the earliest adopters out there. After 4 years at Sarah Lawrence, I found myself at Long Island University's downtown Brooklyn campus. I spent a decade there rolling with the punches of big deal database packages, the insistence of the strange, I always found it strange insistence of faculty that their students need to use JSTOR just because they do, even if that JSTOR doesn't have a lot to do with the classroom assignment. Grappling with the ways algorithmic retrieval systems have gotten just good enough that we find ourselves arguing against their convenience, as some of the only people in the university and in the field who know that algorithms themselves are troubling tools of a narrowing epistemic frame. I worked with colleagues in and out of libraries on efforts to transform scholarly publishing to open access models, learning more than I wish I did about how to make the open journal systems platform go. And now we find ourselves grappling with the ways that artificial intelligence will shape the future of knowledge production, dissemination, and preservation. And I'll admit that here is where I'd sort of like to get out of the car. The implications are too enormous and complex, and to grapple with them at the same time that we're struggling just to keep the lights on our libraries, it's a lot, and I might be a little bit done. But all of this is why I think of library workers, why I think of all of us as infrastructure builders. We build things that keep knowledge formation going, right? And I think that what comes with that is, for many of us, a deep feeling that our work is invisible and that it disappears. I think this is probably a common feeling for people whose job is considered done well when no one can tell that it happened at all. I don't think about boiler repair until my shower runs cold. An example I use because it's unfortunately what we really need is a new boiler, but that's in my apartment building. But another thing with my transit woes that we can talk about in the chat later. But I don't think about it, right? The stoplights. I was in Alaska last week touring libraries, and there was a storm that caused the power to go out in one neighborhood, and the stoplights weren't working. And you don't even think about how crucial they are to keeping people moving from place to place. But when they don't work, you're like, I guess someone's working on it to make electricity happen all the time. I think about interlibrary loan, a thing that libraries do that a lot of people who don't work in libraries feel are magic, or items that are discovered after having been disappeared and hidden forever by historians in the archive, who use the information access tools built by librarians to, in fact, find those pieces of hidden and disappeared knowledge. Who needs a library when we have the internet and can find anything I want on Google? I live with an academic historian, so I get to hear these sorts of stories at the kitchen table, stories about how libraries are either do or don't work, or that they're completely invisible. Karen is my partner, and she went to college, or she got her doctorate at the University of Michigan, and believed somehow that the University of Michigan had this magic system called interlibrary loan and document delivery that could move things around for her. And then she, I don't know, just a couple of years ago, informed me that the librarians at LaGuardia Community College could do something similar, right? She didn't have an understanding or appreciation for the vast collaborative and cooperative network that makes it possible for librarians, or for scholars like her, whether she's at a community college or at a Research One institution, to get information, right? That it relies on all of us being part of a collaborative and shared network. And I think the erasure of our labor is a serious issue, though I'd encourage us to find the absurd humor in it sometimes as well. Karen also just got a public library card a few weeks ago. She'd heard the good news from someone else that you can borrow ebooks from your library even while you're traveling. Like, I don't know how long you have to live with the president of the American Library Association to learn that, but apparently it's rubbing off on her. But I don't want us to get caught up in our own invisibility, to take that problem, serious though it might be, as the problem. We might be invisible to them, but we know we aren't invisible to us. I know the hard work that librarians do. You know the hard work that librarians do. I spent 15 years as an information literacy librarian, many of them as an instruction coordinator. I've done my time with curriculum documents, mapping learning outcomes from one discipline to our own, making the case for information literacy at the faculty senate and in the provost's office, showing up at meetings inside and outside the department, the emails and phone calls and one-on-one conversations that are necessary for us to assert what we know, that we make a difference in the lives of our students. The capacity to engage with information critically and with purpose, to make meaning, to find 5 peer-reviewed evidence-based research articles from core nursing journals within the last 5 years that address wound care, a class assignment that I taught every semester 10 times for about 10 years. We know our work matters. We know that, especially in the academic library, librarians with the bricks and the mortar, the pipes and the wires, the infrastructure of academic inquiry, research, publication, circulation, preservation. We're the ones who build the thing. Mark record by mark record, vendor invoice by vendor invoice, solved problem inside ALMA after solved problem inside ALMA, phone call by phone call. So when people attack the library profession, that's what they're attacking. They're attacking the foundation, the ground, the stuff, not just the stuff of the institution, but the stuff of the imagination. Undercutting our capacity to do our jobs undercuts the institution as a whole. And I think it's important for us to acknowledge that that's the point. So as we rightfully focus our energies and attentions on the work of protecting the right to read and the right to libraries, we also need to protect the right of librarians to do what we do best: pivot in the face of technological, political, social, and economic changes, which are always with us and always have been. And nothing like, one thing I have learned from living with a historian is that when we hear talk of like how rapidly the world is changing right now, the world has always changed at the same pace. Change is a thing that always comes and always happens. And librarians have been pivoting and riding the waves of change really effectively in order to keep these institutions going for 150 years, right? Like, we are always pivoting. And the idea that the transformation of generative AI is more urgent and more quick than the transformation to online databases, say, or punch cards in libraries. Like, the change is always coming, it's always happening fast. And so we must work to preserve and expand the agency of library workers to make decisions about how best to serve our communities, to preserve our right to exercise professional judgments. And our judgments, I believe, by and large, they're good ones. We may make mistakes, we may make bad calls. I've done plenty of that in my career. For some reason, when I started at Sarah Lawrence College, just a couple years out of library school and no experience, I was put in charge of weeding the reference collection. And when I look back at the books that I decided to throw away, I just feel disappointed and sad and embarrassed and ashamed of the things that I decided had no value. In particular, there was a book about the history of ferns that was just a sort of guidebook to ferns in the Northeast. And I was like, who cares about ferns? Well, it turns out now, from a distance, I think many, many people would and do. So we make bad calls, definitely. But I think that the judgments that we make are on behalf of something that's bigger and more important than those individual single decisions. At this year's ALA Council meetings in Baltimore in January, we reaffirmed a set of core values, a revised set that changed the things that we value. One of those values that was fought very hard for and that I really believe in is the value of the public good. And that is what our judgments as library workers are directed toward: the common good, the public good. And I'm not talking about what one person or group of people consider to be the best for a community. I'm not talking here about good books or bad books. I'm not a censor, right? I don't want to limit people's access to information. I don't want to decide, what people can read. But that kind of a judgment implies an exercise of power, the power to decide for others, the power to dole out benefits according to a perspective that supposedly knows better than everyone else. That's not the kind of judgment that I'm talking about. But all agency involves judgment, and in running an institution like a library, the exercise of judgment is inevitable. Money must be spent on a necessarily finite set of things. We buy some books and not others. I visited libraries all over the country in this over the last year and a half as in the sort of leadership seat at ALA, and I've seen libraries spend money on an enormous array of things. In Des Moines, Iowa, their library of things includes a steam carpet cleaner that circulates among the community. I was in the mountains of California with my family over Christmas vacation, stopped by a local library because I needed access to the broadband internet to upload my grades, which were late. I apologize if any of my Queen students are here. And so I went into the library to upload my grades, and as I was leaving, I turned to the side, and there on the shelf is a set of snowshoes that you can check out from the library and use to walk around the trails outside. And of course, the books and the films and the audio materials that we circulate, all of those things are really important. And when we make decisions that we're going to buy a DVD player and not a pool table, or a pool table but not a piano, we're making those judgments. In libraries, such judgments are especially fraught by the imperative to carefully weigh competing needs and divergent impacts. Needs and impacts that at the end of the day aren't really commensurable, because they involve different ways of human flourishing, and different people are just different. Having a carpet cleaner in your library helps people who have carpets to clean, people who have homes that have carpets, right? If you have a piano, it helps people who can play piano. As library workers, we make judgments all the time. At my local branch of the New York Public Library, Windsor Terrace, I see those judgments in the way that they are made in alignment with the people who live in my community. My community is diverse. It's got a lot of young families, and the programming includes significant outreach to children. It also includes a drop-in adult Scrabble game for people like me. The collections are mostly books, primarily, some other kinds of media, but it's a lot of books, as well as a significant number of board games that you can check out and take home. You can contrast that with the library in Whistler, Canada. I was there a couple of years ago. It's a resort town that swells with skiers in the winter, served by a primarily low-income, transient working population, many of whom cannot afford to live in the town where they work, which is probably something that library workers, too many of us, are too familiar with. So that means that those workers, those low-income workers in the resort community, live inside of their cars and vans. So the library lends both an extensive DVD collection as well as the machines that can play them. Many of their patrons have no access to the internet at all. They don't have access to the stuff of to entertainment and joy, which also matters. And the director, Mikhail Fenton, has made a judgment about what her community needs. But I think this is why it's so important that the judgments library workers make are professional judgments. And here I don't mean made by people with the right kind of credential. I mean informed by professional standards that have evolved over more than a century of practice, and which constantly evolve through the ongoing commitment to education, deliberation, and discussion by practicing professionals. So exactly the conversations that we're having today. We're having them because we are professionals and we are interested in the kinds of best practices that can best serve our communities. We talk, right? We get together, we talk, we deliberate, we experiment, we share widely, we reproduce, we do all of the things that professionals do. We get together to come up with collaborative solutions to the knotty problems that all of us face. And I think in this definition, anyone is a professional whose practice is informed by those standards and who shares in that commitment. Libraries as institutions are supported by the institution that is the library profession, and which is kept alive by its various professional associations and by events just like this one, which for 15 years has been pulling people together to have the kinds of conversations we're going to have today. We do our work in part because of our shared commitment to the public good, that core value of librarianship that has been articulated and developed and revised and reaffirmed by generations of librarians working through the professional body of the American Library Association. In a democratic society like ours, the public good means the freedom to flourish for everyone, not just a select few. When we say that we are interested in access to libraries and for all, we mean all. And we really care about that all, I think, in a way that most other professions don't. And that all is what is currently under attack. All means me, all means you, all means people who disagree with me. There's a handful of those who do, and I hope to convince them that I'm right. But the people who agree with me, who disagree with me, and the people who are my kindred spirits, all of us have a right to the library. That when we develop collections, we develop them for a broad public that includes people who read things that I don't want to read, right? One of my favorite stories about this is from Flickr. I don't know if people remember that photo site. The most popular tag on Flickr. Any guesses? Put them in the chat. Me. The word me, right? Because when I develop a collection for myself, I'm most interested in me and what I look like, right? As librarians, we think about metadata differently. We think about collections differently. We think about the public and the all. And I think that's really distinctive and special and incredible about what we do, right? We think about the public. And in our society, that public good means the freedom to flourish. And it necessarily includes the maintenance and provision of the things people need to exercise that freedom. Books, yes, access to the means of imagination, but also to the resources necessary for everyone in a community to have access to more than just bare life. Across the country, library workers are facing restrictions on their agency, whether it's legislation with vague and unenforceable threats against library workers who share a wide range of materials with children, from Missouri to Florida, Texas to Tennessee, Idaho, South Carolina, Georgia, North Carolina, just the list grows day by day. You know, and to be honest, I wake up every morning thinking it's got to be over now. Like we can't go on with people thinking that libraries are a problem when libraries are just good, right? You walk into a library, you see people using computers, checking out books, talking to their friends, in groups of children playing games. You can't be against it, right? Like it's really quite a uniting force, a uniting institution. But across the country, we see that under attack. It's also about combating the fear that many of us are operating right now. Fear that makes choosing a book about Black life or queer life and putting that book on the shelf actually a pretty big ask. Our ability to simply do our jobs is under threat. So part of what we must fight to protect is this, the fact of our own agency. Library workers must be empowered to make decisions that best serve our patrons and our communities without the intrusion of those who imagine that they could run a library better than we can. Every time I've cut my own hair, it's been a mistake. Pretty short, looks pretty easy to do, a trained professional. We are trained professionals as well. So what is to be done in this moment? I think what we need to do as library workers and as people who are advocates for our communities and advocates for the public good, we need to draw on that infrastructural work that we do so well, that we've done since the day we started using cards, like well before that even. You know, the history of information organization is a long one. Back when we just kept lists of books in book form, we need to draw on that infrastructural work that we do so well. We need to organize, and we need to organize, and we need to organize. That turnout at that New Jersey hearing for Martha Hickson is the thing that we need to make sure that we're producing and reproducing everywhere where we see challenges to not just the book, but challenges to our agency to select that book on behalf of our community, the communities that we know in ways that nobody else does. We need to organize, and we need to use our library tools to do so. Here are some things that I think we do really well as librarians. We know how to pull people together and convene people. It's a Friday morning, 9 a.m. 80 of us are here to have a conversation about the best way that we can serve our communities. We know how to convene people. we also know how to work together. Think about all of the systems and libraries that require cooperation and collaboration of so many of us. I talked a little bit about interlibrary loan, but there are lots and lots of examples of that are, I think if the world collaborated the way librarians do, we'd have a very different kind of reality. Some of it's mundane. We're really good at sending email. I'm great at sending email. You might get one from me soon. We know how to call people when we don't get a response. We know how to show up at the faculty meeting. We know how to track you down and buy you a cup of coffee and convince you of the reason that you might want to have a librarian come and work with your students so that they can achieve the learning outcomes that we know are so important. I was talking with a librarian at UC Berkeley just yesterday, and she was describing the tools that she sees as most important. And she was talking about files, right? We're very good at organizing files. We're super good at spreadsheets, right? And those are the tools that we're going to need to organize the power necessary to win the world that we want. So I'd like to bring this talk back to how we started that discussion of library technology. I've been through a lot of technological shifts. I have pivoted from print to digital. I pivoted from the reference desk to the classroom. I pivoted from the swing line stapler, which I'll always hold deep in my heart as the superior piece of library equipment, to the stapler that's held inside the copy machine. Now I'm being asked to pivot to artificial intelligence. But as much as technology matters, and as important as it is, that we're going to talk about some of that in the sessions today, I think it's the pivot that means everything. Our capacity to act responsibly to a given situation with agility to meet the needs of our communities as they emerge without external constraints produced by people who have no idea what kind of work we do. Protecting that capacity, the capacity to do our crucial infrastructural work as librarians, that is the task before us as I see it. And I look forward to talking with you now in the Q&A about the best ways to do that. Thank you so much for your time this morning. I look forward to the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Emily. Please use the Q&A box to share your questions. There is actually one question. I don't know if you can see it, Emily. Can you?
No, I can't.
Oh, okay. I'll read it out. Lori sent a question. Thank you for this engaging talk. I enjoyed the personal stories that enrich and engage us. I live and work in one of the states that as you say, see libraries as dangerous places. Apparently, the powers to be also see ALA as dangerous entity. Many of my students work in Alabama libraries. As you say, staying nimble is important in our profession. What recommendations do you have for libraries in Alabama, those places to what recommendations do you have for librarians in Alabama whose places of work, policies, and work norm are being challenged at the state's highest level of state nimble? If you are not at liberty to comment due to your position at ALA, I understand.
Thanks for the question. It's the kind of question that I spend all of my time thinking about right now. What do we do in places where, as you say, the state's highest powers have set as their sort of target libraries and library workers? It's hard to answer, and I can't comment specifically on Alabama, but what I can say is that we have a lot to learn from those who have come before us. Libraries and librarians are under attack right now, but there has been a long campaign against public sector workers that came before us and will continue after they've decided that libraries are no longer their target. I think if we look to what public school teachers have done and what public school teaching associations and unions have done in response, I think that can be very useful. And connecting with those people in your communities can, I think, inform your practice. I had a conversation with some Alabama librarians just recently and was struck by how painful it is and how lonely it can feel to be in a place where you are the target and the sort of largest national body has become a target at the same time. And the difficulty of navigating those waters, I think, is something that none of us could have anticipated. So talking with people who have faced that, I think is one crucial thing. I want to say also that I am happy to talk with anyone about how I am navigating those challenges personally. I think it can be really valuable. So I'm easy to find on the internet because my last name is Drabinski. I'm happy to come and talk to any group of students or any group of librarians who would be interested in hearing my perspective on that. Because I do have some things to share that I think would be best shared in a one-on-one conversation. But I think holding tight to our core values and our mission, holding tight to the people around us. It's important to remember in these moments that even though the people who would actively censor and ban library materials and make life really, really hard for librarians and the communities they serve, they have power right now. They're loud, but they're few in number. And so I am inspired by the turnout of 400 people in North Hunterdon. I'm inspired by the turnout in Louisiana parishes where banning books has been the centerpiece of the Republican Party strategy down there. And you see people from across the political spectrum, bipartisan support for libraries that have turned out to support those institutions. So remembering that there are more of us than there are of them, I think is really useful. And we're going to have to lean on each other to get through this moment. But how to do that in some parts of the country, it's a long fight, and we never know what's going to be the thing that gets the win. So we need everybody doing something. So I don't know if that's a great answer, but reach out for sure. I'd love to talk with you.
Thank you. Anna asked, I was curious what you think is the most pertinent part of AI debate for librarians. ChatGPT or the tutoring devices, etc., or any insights you have about AI?
Yeah, it's interesting because I have traveled all over the place, all over the country and really the world in the last year and a half, and I always get asked about ChatGPT. I was in a library in rural Malaysia, and that was the question. I was in a library in Alaska, and that was the question. And libraries here in New York City, and that's the question. And I think what we don't want to do is let the question of how this technology will reshape the library profession divorced or separated from the problem of library work and library workers. So I think one thing we miss about AI is like we have an imagination that it happens in a cloud or in some other universe, but it's still made by people, right? I was in Pennsylvania giving a talk at Lehigh University recently and learned about the incredible work they're doing with generative AI there and sort of developing discipline-specific pools of information for researchers. And it was the first example, because there's so much fear and anxiety about it, the first example I'd heard of librarians seeing that the real problem with generative AI is that the pool of information that it reads from is not the pool of information that we as scholars, that we as people who care about the quality of information would choose from, right? And so I think it's important to think about that, that we have something to give, some expertise to give to these new technological systems. But like I said, it's been hard. It's hard for me to focus on ChatGPT and AI when every single library I visit has staffing challenges that just are unbelievable, right? Like I was in a library in Iowa that had a great city council that voted to expand the library. It doubled the size of it, added 2 new service points, but it didn't make the same investments in staff, right? And so if you don't have the staff to run the library to keep it open, thinking about how we can leverage ChatGPT, like that's a smaller risk, I think, to our profession than disinvestment in our institutions. I see the next question. Would you like me just to go ahead, Dr. Sin?
Yeah, John asked, have book challenges spilled over to college or university libraries?
I don't hear as many stories about that. What I will say is that in a lot of places you see legislative efforts to restrict the access to reading for young people that then has implications for the college and university library. So I'm thinking specifically of places where there are restrictions on digital information for children and really wanting to lock down what kids can access on online databases. And in places where those online databases are contracted at the state level on behalf of all public institutions, including the public university or college, you see a real challenge there in just trying to parse it, right? And trying to ensure that a student doing research on reproductive rights policy at a law school in Oklahoma has access to information and it's not restricted because of the presence or existence of children who might also access those databases in a different school context. So it's like I haven't heard stories of like the sort of archetype of a person coming in with a book and yelling at the librarian. I haven't heard of that happening, but I think the insidiousness of efforts to change curriculum in places like Iowa, where you can't have the words diversity in your programming, right? I was visiting with librarians at Iowa State, and they talked about how they have to change the names of all of their initiatives in order to maintain compliance with the law. So like in places like that, those are some of the ways that I see this book ban issue spilling over and affecting higher education a little bit.
Thank you. Any other questions? Lori commented that she thanks you for offering to share your context to the students, and she will share with her colleagues about your offer to speak in courses. Thank you.
I think there's a lot of fear and misinformation out there, right? I'm struck by that. So reach out.
Great, thank you. Please feel free to share your questions on the chat box or Q&A box. Elizabeth just posted a question on the chat box. Thank you for your words of wisdom. I totally agree about staffing issues. How might libraries recruit more diverse staff and retain staff to meet community needs?
The challenge of recruiting a diverse staff, it's a persistent one in the field. The persistent whiteness of librarianship is something like a lot of people talk about it and research with more depth than I can bring to the question. I do think that, at the end of the day, the simple answer is we need to hire a more diverse staff, right? That's what we have to do. And so, you often see people having, meditating on how it's a problem, but like the solution is really simply to hire a more diverse staff. And retention, I think, relies on us realizing as a profession that people struggle when they're alone, right? That like when people are alone, that's when it's hard. If I have people around me that share my concerns and my issues and my problems, it's much easier for me to stay in the institution. And so making sure that when as the field diversifies, that we diversify not one person by one person, but in groups of people and in cohorts that can support each other. I think that's the piece that seems most important to me. I know that, but there are lots of strategies about that. And it's but I think at the end of the day, we simply have to make a decision to hire people who, for white people in positions of hiring authority, to make the decision to hire people that don't just look like them, right? I think that's important.
Yeah. Aaron shared the case that he experienced as a patron complaining about one of their display in an academic library.
I'm sorry to hear that, Aaron. The other thing that I think is important to remember is that like it's okay for people to disagree with us and complain, right? And then I think some of us get quite afraid, and I know that happens to me. Like I have like a hair trigger when someone's mad at me. I just want to like solve and fix the problem. But like at the end of the day, if we're doing our work well and we're thinking about a broad public that unfortunately for some people includes people like me, includes queer people, it includes Black people, it includes people who are, not you know, it includes a lot of us, and all of us are different from one another, but like people are going to have complaints and concerns about that. And, you know, part of it is like steeling ourselves to hear the complaint and then stay committed to the principles and values that have served librarianship well for, you know, more than 100 years, right? Like making sure that that access to information for all, that it means all, unfortunately, you know, and it means all, you know, like people who don't agree with me, and it means I'm going to buy books that I don't like necessarily want to read myself, and that's part of it. Yeah. But being okay with people being mad at you, I don't know, it's not my favorite thing. You know, you go to a lot of therapy about it, but we got to be able to let people be mad at us and disagree with us and still keep doing the things that we know matter the most. Easier to do when you're together, right? Easier to do when you're not by yourself out there. So that's why it's super important. Well, I'll talk to anybody because I need everybody to know that they're not by themselves out here.
Right. Someone asked, thank you for your thoughts on AI and keeping in mind the human intervention that is required to even make it useful. My question is, how can we advocate to keep the interventions of librarian in the conversation when it comes to these issues of tech and the internet more generally, particularly making sure the media talk about this? It gets left out too often, the reality that the internet largely exists only because we are building the resources.
Right? Like that erasure, you know, that's why I talk about it in my talk. I think that erasure is really has big impacts, right? Because people forget that we're behind it. Like the number of times people have told me they got an article from Google Scholar, and I'm like, well, you only got it because there's somebody who selected and purchased and did all of the hard work to make that database like functional on your campus, and then did the work of like connecting it with the links and whatever, right? Like all of that is a huge headache, and the maintenance of that is really intense. It's like, yeah, I don't need it. I just got it on Google Scholar. I'm like, what are you talking about? So I think part of the challenge in this moment right now, when we have all eyes on us, is to make sure that when we're telling stories about American libraries, that we're telling those kinds of stories. And so it's definitely something that I try to do in my role as ALA president, is to always be talking about what we do, like the work we do as librarians, because I think that gets missed. I agree with you. In terms of making sure that it stays a part of the conversation, all of these are like local organizing challenges. Like, who are the stakeholders that you need to have on your side so that they can know that you are doing that work? And what are the most effective ways to get a seat at the table? It's one of the reasons that I think efforts to deprofessionalize the field, to remove the MLS, to remove tenure status for academic librarians, that's about chipping away at our capacity to be voices in the room, right? And so I think it's like part of it is protecting that. And I see Desiree's comment in the chat about the vocal minority out there and asking, have I seen any increase of politicians speaking for libraries? And in fact, I have, right? Like we see a number of bills across the country being put forward to protect the right to read and to sort of legislation that would proactively prevent efforts to ban and censor materials. We saw a law passed about that in Illinois. There are laws about that, or proposed legislation in other states. I think there's even one in Florida. There's a law, there's a piece of legislation in New Jersey. And so you see politicians, you know, supporting libraries in numbers that I don't think we've actually seen before. And so it's like incumbent on us in this moment to make sure that we don't restrict our stories to just the sort of doom and gloom of what is happening in the book ban space, which is, I make no mistake, super important and super vital. But like we have an opportunity with the light shining on us to make sure that we talk about all of these pieces, right? But I don't know how many technical services librarians are in the room, but every time I talk to technical services librarians, I was speaking with a group of catalogers at the University of Michigan a few weeks ago, that work, we need as a profession and as a field to remind ourselves how important and crucial that work is, right? So I think a lot of that work also starts at home, right? Valuing the work of our technical services colleagues and making sure that what happens sort of under the, like outside of the view of the patron, for whom the library is just the person who helps you find a book or checks it out to you, that work, that we see it as crucial and important to, you know, what we do at the public service desk. So at that first job at Sarah Lawrence, it was a small college. We did everything. Like I did everything. Like I troubleshot serial solutions. I ran the circ desk sometimes. I, shelved, and I taught really complex interdisciplinary research classes, right? So I did all of the things. And I think that background has been really useful because I understand that we only work because the infrastructure does. And so we as a profession need to value that as highly as we value everything else that happens in the library.
Thank you for that. That's we've answered all the questions for now. Is there any other questions that you would like to ask?
I can leave you with a final thought then. Let me do that.
Okay. All right.
We need each other in this moment. We need each other in this moment more than we probably have in the profession in a very, very long time. I want to encourage everybody in this room, if you're not already, to not only sign up for the United Against Book Bans campaign, but also to join the American Library Association. We are the oldest and largest library association in the world. At our greatest, we had 62,000 members, and we need that number to be 100,000 now. And when I go out and talk to people about being president of this association, the bigger our number, the more we can credibly claim that there are more of us than there are of them, right? And I think sometimes we look at our associations, and I'd encourage you also to join your state association. I see some DCLA people here, but joining and being part of our professional associations, that's how we're going to preserve the profession for the long term. I think sometimes we can get caught up in the transactional nature of that, right? That what has ALA done for me lately? Like, does it get me any discounts? And I think all of that is important. But what's important right now is for us to demonstrate to the world that we are united as a profession and a field on the right side of history and on the right side of what matters, right? So if you have capacity to be a member, if there are students in this room, please, your student membership lasts 5 years. It's a great way to be a part of a body bigger than yourself in this moment. And so making sure that we invest in the institutions that keep our profession a vibrant and lively one. I'd encourage you to take some time and make some investment in those institutions. I think it's as important now as it's ever been. And thank you so much for spending your morning with me. It's a delight to be able to talk with you, and I hope we run into each other in real life soon.